Senator Dastyari.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President. Most chronologies of the Arab Spring begin in Tunisia in December 2010, but others will recall the frustration that swept across the Middle East and North Africa much earlier, the ones that began with the Iranian presidential elections in June 2009. I can vividly remember the explosive protests filling the streets across Iran with a sea of green. It was the Twitter revolution, Mousavi's Green Movement. Among the arrests, the violence, and the accusations, you may also recall moments of optimism. Was the Iranian Republic finally going to free itself from a militant religious tyranny? Were the people of Iran finally going to win their freedom denied for them for so long? Freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of worship. Mr. Acting Deputy President, this possibility remains deeply personal for me. As many of you in this chamber know, I was born under this religious tyranny myself, and while I've been incredibly fortunate, lucky, to have been gifted a new life in Australia, I'm also very conscious there are tens of millions of people who have not had that opportunity. Iran has long had a difficult relationship with the global community. In recent times, it has even been considered a pariah state. Diplomatic relations have understandably been characterized by mistrust and sometimes outright hostility. Sanctions have restrained the economy. Last year, hope emerged that this might change. Iran's new president, Hassan Rouhani, made statements calling for constructive and dignified engagement with the world, hinting perhaps that there could be a brighter future for the people of Iran. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif went further and described ambitions of, quote, elevating the stature of Iran and achieving long-term comprehensive development. There have already been a few cautious diplomatic improvements. The UK has reopened its embassy in Tehran after closing it in 2011, and speaking last month on the modest improvements in relations with the United States, President Rouhani said, and I quote, "It is not written in stone, one day it will change." But we cannot expect Iran to change overnight. There have been reformers before. Roger Shanahan of the Lowy Institute noted last year that former President Mohammad Khatami commanded significant public support in 2 presidential elections, but still failed to create a lasting shift within the regime. By giving action to the statements he made in his 2013 campaign, Rouhani can now show that the new Iranian leadership is different and a break from the antagonism of the past. Iran's international standing could be significantly improved by a firm commitment to protecting basic rights, including the freedom of expression. Dr. Shanahan suggests that the release of political prisoners and a relaxing of social policies are 2 issues that could win him early plaudits and be achieved at a low cost to the establishment. Ahead of President Rouhani's first address to the UN General Assembly in 2013, 11 political prisoners were released, including high-profile human rights lawyer Nasrin Sotoudeh. This is a positive and symbolic move from a president who campaigned for expanded civil rights and freedoms. It shows there is a potential to fulfill a promise of a freer and more just society. But now the time has come for the administration to show that this was more than just a gesture. Ahmed Saeed, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Iran, noted that there are around 900 prisoners of conscience in Iran. People have been detained for their beliefs. His latest report to the UN Human Rights Council states that as of January this year, at least 895 prisoners of conscience and political prisoners were reportedly imprisoned, including 379 political activists, 292 religious practitioners, 92 human rights defenders, including 50 ethnic rights activists, 71 civic activists, 37 journalists and bloggers, and 27 student activists. One such prisoner of conscience is Muhammad Ali Taheri, who has been detained since 2011. A founder of the spiritual group called Efran el-Halage, he was tried on charges of insulting Islamic sanctities and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment and now reportedly faces possible execution. Amnesty International report that he has been held in solitary confinement at the notorious Evin prison in Tehran and repeatedly threatened with death by guards, tortured into confessing that his spiritual beliefs were both forbidden and a threat to national security. Mr. Acting Deputy President, the incarceration of Mohammad Ali Taheri and hundreds of others cast a long shadow over Iran's credibility. And Mr. Acting Deputy President, the government of Iran must be made aware that the world is watching. We cannot remain silent while political prisoners are executed on politically motivated charges. And we must call on President Rouhani and the Iranian leadership to keep faith with their people and to improve civil liberties and political freedoms. They must end these abuses and ensure that they will never be allowed to happen again. The Iranian government should release the likes of Mr. Taheri and other political prisoners as a matter of urgency, and I call on the Iranian ambassador to Australia to provide a clear commitment that Mr. Taheri's imprisonment will not be followed by his execution. The reporter's report also recently highlighted the fact that Iran executed more people per capita than any other country, with at least 687 people put to death last year, an increase on 165 on the previous year. This rapid escalation caused UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to register his own alarm at the situation. Mr. Ban said since taking office, Rouhani, quote, has not made any significant improvement on human rights. Other concerns include the lack of any significant improvement in freedom of expression, judicial independence, treatment of ethnic and religious minorities, and a disregard for due process and the right to a fair trial. Despite the rhetoric, Human Rights Watch cautions that little improvement has occurred in human rights and arrests motivated by political opposition on religion are still common. Amnesty International has reported a sharp rise in arrests, prosecutions, and imprisonments of independent journalists. Hadi Ghami, Executive Director of International Campaign for Human Rights in Iran, says, "The people of Iran need more than words, they need action. In the international community, we should set the same standard." Mr. Acting Deputy President Ahmed Shaheen notes that international momentum in support of human rights reforms in Iran is growing and should serve as a reminder that the world is watching. It's aware of the facts and the world expects change. The UN Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review is set to take place at the end of this month. This is an opportunity for Iran to not only ratify 126 recommendations it previously accepted, but to exceed our expectations. Progress on these issues would strengthen the case to further reduce sanctions. In meeting the international standards for civil and political freedoms and human rights, President Rouhani will be taking important steps towards fulfilling the hopes and aspirations of millions of Iranians.
Thank you, Senator Dastyari.